Record. Amazing. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our event today. I'm so glad to be in community with you and for this wonderful conversation with Christabel Nsiah-Buadi and Esther Armah on the topic of using storytelling as a strategy for systemic change. So in case we haven't met before, my name is Claire Byrne. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Community Manager for RSA US. So I'm joining you today from the Cowichan Valley and the traditional and unceded territory of the Quitsim people on Vancouver Island. And it is grey and overcast, but I'm hoping it clears up for the day and get out for a walk soon. So as folks are joining, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, your pronouns if you choose to do so, and where you're joining us from. We often get such a vast spread of folks across the world at our events, so it's always really heartwarming to see where people are calling in from. We often start our virtual gatherings with a short connection prompt, which often helps kind of ground us in the topic, really kind of start thinking about what we're going to explore for the next hour, and also just learn a little bit more about each other, and it can be fun. So one thing that came up earlier, and thanks to Esther for this one, is what does your go-to comfort, or why does your go-to comfort food make you feel good? Food is such a way for everybody to come together, stories to be shared. So I'm really curious on this. I'm going to nerd out because I'm a total foodie as well. So what people have to say. And what folks like to enjoy, what their comfort food is. So while we're doing that and while you're mulling that over, I just want to give you a little bit of a background on RSA US and also just cover some, I don't want to say ground rules, but just kind of like how we show up in this space together and how we're in community with each other. And so for those of you who are new to the RSA and you're wondering who we are and what we do, we are a global membership organization that unites people and ideas to solve the challenges of our time. And our roots trace back to Enlightenment era coffeehouse culture where people gathered to exchange ideas, challenge the status quo, and imagine new possibilities. So since then, our work has continued to evolve to meet the needs of each era and support progress across industries, sectors, and communities. And in the RSA US, so a little bit about us, we are a 501c3 charity affiliate of the RSA. And so we're a social change organization founded in London on the belief that private citizens can come together, pool their resources, improve society. And we really do leverage that 270-year-old history rooted in creativity, connection, and innovation. While staying pretty nimble and entrepreneurial in our approach, we are a small but mighty team of 4 people spread across the US, and in my case, the West Coast of Canada. So we really do work very closely with our fellowship community. We leverage the best of our history and engage about approximately 1,300 fellows distributed across the US to really mobilize change through collaboration, shared learning, and relationships. And we're big on social connections in our team. So through gatherings, partnerships, and local initiatives, we connect those big ideas and real world impact, and very much about thinking and doing, and bridging across sectors to address a lot of the most urgent needs and challenges that are coming out of the US specifically. And I will kind of wrap it up and stop talking in a little bit, but I just wanted to share as well some of our community engagement, like norms, agreements, rules, whatever we want to call them, which you should see on your screen, and you should have seen when you were in the waiting room getting ready to join this event with us today. So we just encourage you to spend a little bit of time just looking over how you are committed to showing up in this space. That will be inclusive, safe, authentic, collaborative, respectful, and ultimately kind spaces, which really do promote learning and support our purpose. So feel free to pop in the chat if you think there's anything missing from that list or anything that you would like to flag or call out. We're always open to improving how we choose to show up in these spaces. And if anything comes up for you and you just want to send me a DM, I'm Claire Byrne, RSA US. Feel free to send me a question, feedback. Nothing is a silly bit of feedback or question. I'm always open to it. And similarly for Tony, who's Tony Shola, and you can send her a DM too. So I will be excited to introduce Christabel and Esther and share a little bit more about them and their work in the world. So of about 31,000 fellows across the globe, which is a lot whenever I say that number out loud. We have about 1,300 in the States, including Christabel, who's based in LA. And I just want to give you a little bit of a background about who she is and what she does. She is an executive strategist and the founder of Your Podcast Pipeline, which is a narrative development coaching program for thought leaders, journalists, creative founders, and public speakers seeking to amplify their mission and message through the audio and embrace their voice. So Christabel, who's been once described as an empowering creative, which I can concur, that's totally true, who listens powerfully and possesses a gift and passion for distilling big, complex ideas into their core truth and meaning. And she leverages this ability to shape shows, develop concepts, and build connections through storytelling. Before this, she built and led creator accelerator programs at Spotify, including the renowned Sound Up Behind the Mic Production Accelerator. As a journalist, she's worked across 3 continents, leading breaking news teams and hosting shows for networks like NPR, BBC, American Public Media, and her writing has appeared in The Independent and British Vogue, and she has also appeared on ABC News. Whew, the bio. Yeah, oh, I'm excited. I'm excited to dig in. And Esther, thank you so much for being here with us today. Esther is the founder and CEO of the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. She is also the author of Emotional Justice, A Roadmap for Racial Healing, which was a #1 release on Amazon for 6 weeks in the General Sociology of Race Relations category, and a top summer 2023 pick by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Esther is an award-winning former international journalist, playwright, filmmaker, and international speaker on emotional justice. Her 5 plays include Forgive Me, and in 2025, she directed the short film Goodbye to the Emotional Mammy, which examines how Black women shoulder the weight of the world and the wellness that they deserve. The film screened in the United States, Ghana, South Africa, and Washington, D.C. I'm excited to hear more because we were talking about this earlier on. And it has sparked some really powerful and healing conversations across the Black diaspora community. She's appeared on MSNBC, CNN, and BBC, and Channel Africa. And she was the Spring 2022 Distinguished Activist in Resident at NYU's Center for Black Visual Culture. Okay, I'll take a deep breath. Those are some impressive bios. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Christabel to set the stage. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for listening to me all.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Claire. Big bios, but I have to say, I'm really excited about speaking with Esther today because I have always believed in the power of truth telling in stories, which is why even as a journalist, when I started, I was a baby journalist in the early aughts. I was always looking for the truth of the matter in narratives that were woven around the facts, right? That's part of the reason as to why I became a journalist. And when I first met Esther, in the early aughts in New York City, I was it came at, quite frankly, it came at the right time. As another global journalist, another Ghanaian British journalist, I was immediately drawn to her wisdom and her ability to articulate the confusion that I was feeling at the time. And she still does that, to be honest, when I talk to her. But at that time, it was the confusion about being a Black journalist who was able to bear witness and connect the dots about what was happening in our world. And that was at a time when, people were really wondering about what was happening in the world because of, the invasion of Iraq, and with the world felt very unstable at the time. And while at one point I was able to connect those dots, I was able to kind of like fill in the cracks of the stories in our community, and those cracks being the voices that we weren't hearing from quite frankly people on the ground. As you've heard today, Esther is the founder and CEO of the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. She too was a journalist. She too connects dots in the most really, I don't know, interesting way. But storytelling has been at the heart of everything that she does. With her work through the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice, what they do is they build emotional infrastructure to shape culture, institutionalize wellness, and transform personal leadership. And she's still using storytelling. As you've heard, she's doing it in a variety of ways through plays, audio, and film to achieve this change through her emotional justice framework. And I wanted to talk to her today because at this time where, we have a creator economy where we're hearing lots of different stories, we're at a time where we're hearing different narratives, we're talking about content for connection, we're talking about storytelling. I really think that Esther is the perfect and best person to talk about all of this. And the powerful truth at the heart of her work is simply this, which is going to be the center of our conversation today. You cannot heal a harm you do not name, nor need a history you do not know. And storytelling helps us do that, right? That is the central tenet of what she does. And I'm excited to talk about that. And it's like I said, it's going to be the foundation of our conversation today, where we really talk about how we stop framing profound harm as simply disagreement, because there are ripple effects. Ripple doesn't even seem to cover it, but there are ripple effects that we are feeling today from the past, and there will be ripple effects that we'll feel in the future. So Esther, thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited. Can you
Me
tell?
too. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Welcome,
So,
everybody. Lovely to see all these faces.
so before we begin, you are based in Accra, despite that accent. You are based in Accra, and you are there right now. And you just returned from Washington, D.C. Can you tell us what you're doing?
Yes, I sure can. So there was a lot of words and titles. Essentially,
Hmm.
I self-describe as a global Black chick.
Hmm.
And for me, that means that global Blackness is the lens through which I do all the work that I do.
Hmm.
And specifically, we use storytelling as a strategy for systemic change. And so I was just in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown, where the O'Neill Institute hosted my short film called Goodbye to the Emotional Mammy, which really centers the emotional weight that Black women in the US are carrying and the wellness that they deserve.
Hmm.
It's actually part of a bigger project called Wellness in the Face of Warfare. And right now, in the US and globally, storytelling has become currency to impede progress or to reframe harm as thriving. So what does that look like? It looks like we think that the thriving of Black and Brown communities actually represents the loss of progress, the loss of possibility for white communities. And that's now framed in America as patriotism or truth telling or a return to. And really, what it is storytelling has now become currency that appreciates or depreciates depending on whose hands are holding the storytelling. So we see elements of a political landscape that has made the story of America's becoming a fiction to fuel a version of being that actually simply supports a white supremacist structure. And it matters that we recognize that storytelling is more than language, it's more than words, it's more than a version, that it's actually currency. It's an economy. And it's an economy that is now being used. You hear my accents. I was born in London. I live in Accra. I do a lot of work back and forth in different parts of the US and in South Africa. So I'm seeing how the supremacist nature of storytelling rooted in whiteness is taking hold. See it in the UK, you're seeing it in the US, and they reflect one another. So this is really about how storytelling has become this economy, has become this currency to fuel a version of the world that doesn't just center whiteness, but elevates it to this savior reality that was part of colonialism, that was part of apartheid, and that was part of enslavement. And that's why Wellness in the Face of Warfare is a project that is saying, no matter the story that political landscapes tell, in order to fuel a version of the world that centers them and puts you in harm's way, there must be a focus and a centering of your wellness so that your thriving continues to be part of your story of becoming, even when there's so much bleakness, so much devastation, and so much destruction in different parts of the world. And so that's why we've done this kind of global screening and dialogue tour that started in New York in April, came to Accra in Ghana, went to Stellenbosch in South Africa in Cape Town, and then ended up in Washington, D.C. And that one centers Black women. We're then going to be launching another one in 2026 that is specifically about masculinity, because that is also a major issue that is part of the storytelling currency that both puts us in harm's way, but actually there's an opportunity for healing if we would but grab it. That's my work, to grab that space where the healing is possible.
All right, so grab that space. When I listen to what you're saying now, I immediately think about like the gaps, right? This gap we talk about all that, like the storytelling gaps. You're talking about currency, right? And we're seeing an emission of part of this nation's history through, in the museums, in different ways in which this story is being told. Can you talk to me more about, and I want to hear more about the screening specifically itself, because I think there's some action that I want people to hear about as well and talk about that. But the gaps that I hear you saying that you are filling, tell me more about how storytelling fills that narrative gap, right? Because it's like I almost see it like on a national level, you've got, the changing narratives, right? Or the changing stories. But on the ground level, in terms of the individuals, that's where the gaps are being filled, because we're talking about
Right.
individual wellness. So can you tell me more about that, please?
Yeah, so we, in simple terms, we literally call it the 4 H's:
Mm.
healing harm, heeding history.
Hmm.
Healing harm, heeding history. Why? As I said, you cannot heal a harm you do not name, and you cannot heed a history you do not know.
Hmm.
What we have right now is it's not an omission in terms of history, it's a reframing of that history. And so you have two things that happen. You have the history of harm being reframed as actually the story of possibility.
Okay.
So when somebody says that slavery really wasn't that bad, you reframe the harm and the devastation of turning bodies into property and all the violence that came with that. You turn that into, actually, this opened up the possibility for a different kind of life for Black people who were on the continent, who ended up in America or the Caribbean or Brazil or the UK. That framing harm as possibility is a massive part of the storytelling currency that we have now. And so the screenings that we have been doing have been about really putting language to how storytelling is becoming this currency of harm, reframed as possibility, reframed as a fresh future, reframed as patriotism. And that in that reframing, you've also created this notion, this illusion that really what we are calling harm is nothing more than disagreement. So
Right.
you see that when somebody says the language that you're using actually is harmful to me and it's devastating to me, it becomes, well, I'm entitled to speak my truth and to disagree with you.
Hmm.
But that has only become the case if the harm is so often being perpetrated in white spaces towards people who are not white and male. So towards all women, towards brown people, towards Black people. And then it's reframing that harm and saying, but this is what freedom looks like. But the freedom is not universal. The freedom is limited, it's restrictive, and there's a very specific ceiling to it. And so with the screenings that we're doing, we're opening up space for discussion about what has the current storytelling currency of framing harm as disagreement. How is that shaping you? How
Right.
is that shaping your organization? How is that shaping your leadership? How is that impacting you? How is that framing your interpersonal relationships within the places that you work, that you pray, that you do labor in, that you do leisure in? And I think without a critical engagement of those kinds of questions, we're in danger of succumbing to this storytelling frame and dismissing it in ways that don't allow us to recognize this is actually an opportunity to say, if you can frame harm as disagreement, how might you frame healing as not just possibility, but actually the universal future that we all need that requires not just a reimagining, but a reckoning? And
Hmm.
so I'm really inviting us to recognize that storytelling is part of how we protect systems that harm. And
Hmm.
therefore, storytelling can be about how we push systems that heal, but also how we dismantle that harm. I think that's pivotal.
It's so so storytelling, I think often we see as passive, right?
Yes.
I'm listening to the story and it was a lovely story, or I'm going to this, I'm listening and I'm learning something, and then I get to do the work internally. And the way you're talking about storytelling is very active, very
Right.
proactive,
Right.
really very powerful, right? So, and there are a lot of communities that, that may feel this way in terms of like, our people are reshaping our narrative. And as somebody who's been on this earth for a while, right, it's really been interesting. And someone who's a journalist, it's been interesting to see how these narratives are literally being shaped in real time, right? I remember being younger and being like, oh, well, and my teacher would be like, well, history is written by the winners, so you get to, make sure you do your research. But literally, as a journalist, understanding, for example, what happened in the early aughts and seeing how people have forgotten or don't know, and it could be even in the pop culture sphere, right? But we listen to these stories and we take them as truth, as the whole truth, so to speak.
Mhm.
I find it quite scary, actually, how quickly the stories are being used to help to allow us to forget. And those people who hold on to the full story or their piece of that story that we're telling are seen as, quite frankly, troublesome or troublemakers. So I guess in some ways, can you talk me through, or just give your thoughts on, we're talking about the power of storytelling. When did you realize how powerful storytelling could be in filling in the gaps of the collective narrative?
When I realized that I believed the way to success was the approval of whiteness, the
Mm,
centering of whiteness. And as long as there was that kind of approval and that kind of recognition, that I would be okay. And
mhm,
that is one of the most successful ways in which storytelling shaped my identity and my relationship to power. It
mhm,
taught me that my relationship to power required the approval of whiteness in order for me to succeed. That is
mhm,
that is an incredibly devastatingly successful use of storytelling.
mm.
What we have now in this contemporary landscape is um, that storytelling is not just about um, a mission, and it's not just about reframing. It's about suggesting that the story of how you came to be is a total fiction if it's rooted
Yeah.
in the truth of a history that communicates that whiteness was not savior, it was not curator, and it was not conqueror. If you suggest that whiteness was harm making, was violence, was devastation, then the story has become you simply don't understand what happened historically, and you refuse to be part of this great future that we're building. So that
That
storytelling
excludes you.
is,
Sorry to jump in,
yeah,
ultimately, right? Hmm.
yeah. And it's not that it excludes you, it's that it reframes you as a beneficiary of violence that was perpetrated by other people.
Mm.
So it's not even that if it excluded you, you can write yourself back in, but it reframes you as a
Mm.
beneficiary of what was actually violent.
Mm.
Therefore, suggesting that it wasn't, how can it be violent if you were a beneficiary of that, um, of what happened? If you had been, if slavery gave you jobs, how could it be
Mhm.
that bad? If
Right.
apartheid
Things we've heard, right.
meant that you have this phenomenal economy in South Africa, how can it be that bad? You
Mhm.
benefited. In the UK, there's this notion, for example, about around Winston Churchill. The
Right.
story of Winston Churchill as a white man is that he's considered one of the greatest Britons. In any kind of great 100 list, he's one of the greatest Britons. That is true for white British people. For black and brown people, he is a white supremacist murderer. That is also true for black and brown people. Here's the challenge. Because the storytelling currency has always been singular and linear, it doesn't take account of multiple communities and multiple populations. It's curated to
Right.
be restrictive. So what does that mean? It means that the only version of Winston Churchill that can live is the version that celebrates whiteness and then insists that those who've been harmed by
Mm.
that story simply reframe their version of what happened in order to center whiteness. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the contemporary landscape that we are in, where storytelling centers whiteness, does harm to any kind of universal humanity. And it will never not do harm until we name it as harm and we heed the history that recognizes, of course, different things that people had experiences of violence that was different. If the violence served you, your version and vision of that violence is, well, there was benefit to it. And if the violence harmed you, you have a different version. The question is, what if storytelling centers a universal humanity?
Right.
If storytelling centers a universal humanity, then the totality of what happened must be told. That's the only way that you protect and preserve the humanity. If you don't tell the full story, you dehumanize on the one hand, and you elevate beyond reality on the other hand. What does that mean? You create the illusion of inclusion to preserve the status quo that continues to do harm in the name of refusing to heed history and rejecting the naming of the harm that you have to heal.
And nobody wins on that front, right? And so in terms of what you're saying there, right, we are in a creator economy, right? You're talking about, I'm going to use the word, please correct me. We're hearing multiple stories, right? Because two things can be true at the same time, right? You can be a leader to one person and a villain to another person, right? It's not about perspective, it's about different realities, right? We're in a creator economy where we're hearing lots of different things coming out. I was checking your socials. You called yourself a creator, right? And I thought that was lovely and really interesting, partly because like the word creator can mean different things to different people. But the reason why I bring that up is because as a creator, where we are hearing multiple stories at the same time, what does that look like for you today in terms of the work that you do? Because I think it shifts from when you were a journalist, you're telling, you're shifting narratives, or you're trying to complete a narrative in one way, but in this creator economy, it looks and feels different.
It really does. So for me, I put it down to simply this: what you harness and what you hijack. As a creator, what do you harness and what do you hijack? We are living in what we define as a creator economy, where we are harnessing elements of history in order to hijack what has already been established as a truth. What does that look like? George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and that ignited a global outpouring of outrage, pain, horror, terror. It happened at a very particular time. We were on lockdown. So it was precarity, it was health fragility, there was devastating loss, grief, fear. It was a deeply fragile time. And in the midst of that, a man is murdered. And he's murdered. We are witness to that murder. The visualization of the murder, the filming of it by the teenage Black girl, meant that the whole world could see the reality of what it meant to be Black and male in the United States when you come into contact with police who commit violence that can take your life. But the world saw it on a global stage, and because everybody was home, everybody's looking at the same thing. That was then harnessed to transform the world of race and culture across corporations, across political landscapes. What did we see? We saw what we call DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. There was all this, it was millions of dollars poured into this reality, and there was all this work. Frankly, some of it deeply performative, but put that to one side for a second. But there was all this
black squares. Are we talking about the black squares? For example?
And the kente.
Oh, yes.
Can I curse on this show? I don't know if I can. But the kente cloth.
It's done.
Took a knee and did the whole thing. I was like, what the hell? What the hell? So it was harnessed to transform an entire landscape.
Mm-hmm.
There is an election. That same incident that was harnessed to transform an entire landscape that led to people pouring millions of dollars into issues around race, around diversity, around inclusion, now becomes hijacked to tell a completely different story. It's the same incident, the same killing, the same devastation, the same loss, but what was harnessed to transform now becomes hijacked to dismantle. And we've literally seen the very same incident be used to completely dismantle what was created. Now, it did two things. It highlighted the fragility of what we build when we don't secure it and we don't sustain it. So if you're going to harness something and you don't sustain and secure it, you leave it open to a landscape that is always looking to hijack what is transformative in order to literally take an entire world backwards. And it did it, not just in America, in the UK, some of the largest far-right protests. You had 110,000 people on the streets celebrating the far right. Unprecedented numbers in the United Kingdom. And as somebody who looks I do my work through globality, I'm always looking to see how things are moving and changing. And this word of how do we harness one thing and how is it being hijacked? The entire political landscape in America, in the UK, has been about hijacking what was harnessed for transformation in order to justify something that dehumanizes, something that negates a thriving for a shared humanity, and something that centers whiteness and white supremacy. So that's the thing, that creator economy, what do you harness and what do you hijack? And in what you harness and what you hijack, are you looking to heal some harm because you named it, or heed some history because you know it, or are you looking to now frame harm as an opportunity to return to a status quo that served a tiny minority, but actually destabilized entire nations? What do you harness and what do you hijack?
What do you recommend people? I know it's different for each thing, but I'm seeing some in the chat as well. What would you've given an example of, like, on a global scale, what would one person harness and what would one hijack?
So when you think about it in your own world, for every single person on this call, I would say think about your circle of influence. And your circle of influence has three elements. It's individual, in other words, how you use your own voice. It's interpersonal, the relationships that you have that are close, where you talk to people and people talk to you. You listen to those people and those people listen to you. It's interpersonal. And it's institutional. The places in which you work or in which you pray, where you have the kinds of relationships where people can pay attention. And in that circle of influence is where you decide what you are going to harness versus what other people have hijacked. What does that mean? It means that if I take my own circle of influence, my own individual circle of influence, individually, how do I use my voice? How do I draw attention to the things that I say that I believe in? And how do I use whatever platforms that I am on to engage my voice? That's harnessing my individual influence to whoever it is that is out in the world who follows me. Interpersonally, I would say I am not Christian. I worship at the altar of Sunday brunch. So for my Sunday brunch and my bottomless mimosa, I have a circle of women that I meet with all the time, and I actually do it globally. People know me for doing tea and doing brunch. So I have these circles globally. So what's your interpersonal circle where you listen to folks and folks listen to you? Take some time in those circles to engage a conversation or engage something specific about what is happening in the world, to name a harm and offer a history that we can heed in order to be transformative. That's the interpersonal. And then whatever that harm you name is, whatever that history you're inviting people to heed is, you then encourage your particular circle to go back and do it with their circle of influence. That's how we turn what feels like a ripple or what feels small into something way, way, way bigger. And then institutionally, there are institutions where you work. the places where you go play or do hooping or go to the gym or whatever it is your leisure space is, where you're also in community with folks. How do you engage that community in paying attention to a particular thing that you are interested in? And so here's the thing, we do it all the time. We just don't necessarily do it strategically. So what I'm saying, make storytelling a strategic engagement for your circle of influence, individually, interpersonally, and institutionally. And when you do it in that way, you're saying, what is the harm that I'm going to name that needs healing in my circle? And what is the history that I think that we should heed? It is amazing what people don't know. I was in New York for the election, for the New York election. Go Zoran, huge fan. And one of the things that was interesting to me is I stopped and I thought, we were scouting because we were filming in Prospect Park and we were going to be filming in Harlem. So I was scouting in locations. I was moving between two different boroughs. And I was stopping to speak to all the different canvassers who were out checking people had voted, et cetera, et cetera. That moment of exchange is part of a circle of influence, that they are talking to me about something that I am interested, and I'm listening to them about something that they want to share. Canvassing, that huge volunteer army that Zoran Mamdani built, was built through circles of influence. It was built through each individual New Yorker saying, I live in a rent-stabilized apartment. I can go talk to someone else who lives in a rent-stabilized apartment to break down why freezing the rent in New York is good. I'm not talking about necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with Zoran Mamdani. I'm saying, look at how the circle of influence can work to go from something small to something that has a massive, massive effect and transforms what people think they know about the political landscape to make it become something else. Every single volunteer, 110,000 strong, had a circle of influence. I had a friend who'd never canvassed before, who lives in Harlem and chose to canvass in Harlem. She chose one issue. She lives in rent-stabilized apartment. So she said, I'm just going to talk to people about the freezing the rent and why I think it's a good idea, based on what? Her circle of influence. She lives in Harlem, has lived there for many, many, many years, loved it deeply, knew it really, really well, and knocked on doors to speak about that. Her individual voice, interpersonal connection, knocking on the door, having a conversation, and then sharing, naming the harm that needed to be healed. That not choosing to do this risks the very thing that you're fighting, that you say that you want to protect. And what was the history she was heeding? The history that she lived, her lived experience as a Harlem resident. So that's taking what is a framework, the idea that you harness, that you don't hijack, that you heal harm and heed history, and bringing it all the way down to a personal example. If that was true for a friend of mine, explore your own environment and say, how do I speak to each of those three things for where I am, for what I do, and for where I want to go.
What I'm also hearing here, and I'm running out of time, but what I'm also hearing here, Esther, is, well, let me ask you this question. What does storytelling look like then? Because what I'm hearing is storytelling, right?
Absolutely.
We all tell stories every day. Our conversation, somebody who works in editorial, right? Interviews are a form of storytelling because you have to figure out where we're going from A to B, right? We're communicating and we're sharing, right? And so I think oftentimes when we think about storytelling as a tool, you've just given a very clear example of what that looks like, which is actually an exchange and conversation, which I think is the heart of storytelling, right? So in today, if anyone is not confused, but is trying to grapple with the traditional idea of what storytelling is, how would you break that down for them in terms of how they could harness what they're doing in 2025 storytelling?
So too often we mix things up. We talk about journalism and storytelling as if they're the same thing, and they're not. We definitely are in a space where journalism has profoundly changed, and what used to be, I mean, I reject the notion of neutrality. I call it manufactured neutrality. It's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time.
Neutral, exactly.
So what storytelling is at its soul and core is framing. In other words, how do you frame the world in which you are living in order to either support a perspective, to sustain a perspective, or to reject one? And you can take the same set of facts. I showed it with George Floyd. A group of people used it for this thing. A group of people use the same set of facts for another thing. Framing is a critical part of storytelling. I deal in frameworks. Like, I build frameworks. And when I talk about emotional infrastructure, storytelling is about two things. It's about emotion and it's about connection.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't feel it, I wouldn't call it storytelling.
Right.
And if you don't connect to it, it's also not storytelling. The point about stories is that they move you and that you can connect to them in some way or another. Those are key critical elements that transform it from just journalism, which may be the sharing of information, where storytelling is about the connection through emotion of specific things. That is why, sadly, the horror show that is the contemporary political landscape works. They have harnessed the emotions of fear and threat to connect to people who are scared and feel threatened. So what does that look like? If your world as a young white man feels like it's falling apart, and actually it is your failure to harness, it's your failure to take advantage of great opportunities that's the reason for that. But somebody comes along and said, that's not why you're failing. You're failing because that Black woman, that brown woman, that Muslim woman, that Jewish person, that gay person has taken this set of opportunities that were really directed to you. They are threatening the future that should be yours. That is a connective, emotive path that is working for too many white folks in different parts of the world. And it feeds this narrative of the illusion of a meritocracy. I did this, I worked for this, I earned this person is taking it. It is deeply emotive and it's deeply connective. But what I want us to focus on is the storytelling to sustain harm is a powder keg and it's a powerhouse right now. But what I want to invite us to stand with and think about is a storytelling that heals, that develops a connection that sustains your humanity, as opposed to one that simply identifies the ongoing horror that we live with. And I want to use one great example of storytelling. There's a phenomenal, of course, I'm very excited about my own projects. Goodbye to the Emotional Mammy shares that. And the Moving Masculinity project that we're building does that as well. And Moving Masculinity is a project that's very simple. It says very simply that community is the story of transforming for good. But community, when it comes to masculinity, has been the story for developing and sustaining violence. What people call the kind of the manosphere, in other words, this space of podcast bros and men coming together to perpetuate these ideas that somebody's coming to take your shit. And because they keep taking your shit, you can't advance. And the people that keep taking it are women, all women, they're Black women, they're brown people, they're anybody that's not basically a white man. And so that has been the story of masculinity in the digital world. And so what we said is, what if we create another story? Yes. And simply said, whatever you feel about the grievance culture and the harm that is perpetrated, actually, it's a community. It's a place where men gather and they share a certain thing. I said, so the thing that trumps community, forgive me using that Trump word, but the thing that trumps community is community that heals versus community that harms. Yep. So Moving Masculinity, we call it the Emotional Justice Digital Village. And it is a community where men get to engage and exchange around vulnerability, loss, grief, pain, shame, regret. We do it through storytelling, through poetry, through video, through audio. We use our phones. You come up with all these different tools to build a community where men can go into spaces and engage digitally that is actually about developing emotional literacy and building emotional infrastructure. What does that mean in storytelling? It means you need to do what? You need to connect, and you need to emote safely. You need to identify the emotions that you feel, and you need to connect to other men to give you the permission to expand and to engage. And so that's one example. There are so many, but I use that to say masculinity has been named, the toxic masculinity has been named as problematic. I talk about a traumatized masculinity that requires healing. Yeah. But I also say that that healing work is the work of men. It is nobody else's work but the work of men. But what we do with emotional justice with the framework is we develop resources and tools that you can engage. Why a digital village online? The same thing, a circle of influence. Individual men connecting interpersonally to transform the institution of masculinity, one man, one voice note, one engagement at a time. Recognizing that by doing and building that, it's not just transformative for men, it's transformative for communities, that has a ripple effect into the places where you work, and it has a ripple effect right across the board. And I think that because the horror is like Kilimanjaro, it's just looming, it's tsunami level, we don't recognize that the healing is no less powerful, but requires strategy, it requires tactic, and it requires us recognizing that storytelling is both about what we harness against what has been hijacked. It's about the harm that we heal by naming it. And it's about heeding the history that we know. And where we don't know it, we choose to learn it before we articulate it. Fundamentally, though, storytelling is saying, if you don't feel, you will not connect. If you don't feel it, you won't connect to it. So somebody else won't connect to it if they don't feel it. So it requires both. It requires both.
And you said something about you work on frameworks, I work on framing, right? And I've had conversations with people who are like, well, like framing a narrative, I have a reaction to that. And I understand that, right? And they said, story, that I have a reaction to that. And the reaction that they're having is there's a level of going back to what you were talking about earlier, there's a level of inaccuracy or lies to that story, right? It's like a fairy story. And what I say to people is that it's the truth, right? When we talk about framing your story, when we talk about framing your experience so you can amplify that and talk about that, I'm doing a similar thing in some ways, which is that I'm telling you to claim your story back but on an individual level, because what I'm saying is that the story that you've been told to be quiet, you've been told to shut up, you've been told not to say it, and you through your work in that framework is saying speak on it, and also we're going to speak on it loudly, and we're going to use these frameworks to do that. And I think that's so incredibly important and powerful in this particular day and age. Have you heard people kind of have a reaction to the idea of storytelling as a fiction? We live in the era of where people say fake news. Sorry, folks. So I think people are very they're very suspicious of that. But the way in which you have talked about this is very much from a claiming that back and from a healing perspective. So how do we continue to claim that back when in the face of a very skilled movement where they're telling a different story? How do we redress that balance? Because I think that's a lot of the reason as to why people are feeling very nervous and scared. I think rightfully so.
I think two specific things. One is we've got to reckon and reject this economy of silencing. Silencing is a massively important tool to the storytelling of sustaining harm. And it's not silencing as an individual act. It's silencing that comes with both threat and consequences. Storytelling isn't just about what you say, it's about what you don't say.
Yeah.
Because storytelling is framing. So framing is not, it's not the sequence, it's not the set of events that happened, it's how you talk about those sequence of events. It's what those sequence of events becomes in the hands of different people, depending on whether you're trying to sustain harm or whether you're trying to enact healing. And so the economy of silence, I would also add the currency of suppression, are
Yes.
critical contemporary tools that are shaping where we are right now. And so you see it. You see it in what people think they will lose by what they choose to say. And so when instead they choose silence, as if silence isn't also speech. What you don't
Yes.
say matters as much as what you do say.
If not
And
more sometimes, Esther. If
yeah,
not more
yeah,
some.
yeah. And that's the the power of storytelling. If somebody asks you a question, let me just do a really simple example. This is a brown book.
Okay, Esther.
So Esther Armah, I'm going to ask a question for Esther Armah. Did you pick up a brown book? No, I didn't. I put the book down. And let me use silence. Esther Armah, did you pick up a brown book? In the silence, you create a narrative about what happened to the brown book. Silence is never the absence of words. It's the space where you create a new story about what is.
Oh, can I jump in there? It's not just that you're creating a new story, you're leaving it to me to fill in the noise and tell my own story.
Right.
There's not an agreement. Okay.
Right. And what we have right now is a landscape where the silences are always being filled in by people who have a commitment to sustaining harm. But if your commitment is to elevate your humanity, if your commitment is to sustain healing, what will you fill your silence with? But also, when have you been silent when actually you may have needed to speak? And here I
Mhm.
talk about the two C's, courage and comfort, because we're at a moment in storytelling that requires courage. And
Yes.
courage to be fully who you are, and courage to be fully who you are, and courage to speak truth in an environment where truth has literally been declared the enemy if it doesn't frame harm as celebration, if it doesn't center whiteness, if it doesn't elevate whiteness. That's global at this point.
Can I add
And
one thing? I don't mean to be a pain in the butt, and you might have said that. It also means having the courage to have a perspective, right? Really leaning into that and owning what that is. I just felt like I really have to underscore that because I think sometimes people feel like they have to say all the things.
right.
Have your perspective. Base it in truth, by the way, but have your perspective. Sorry, as you were saying.
Right. And courage versus comfort. Comfort is, I mean, I could say something, but the stakes of me saying something, what I think I will lose is so great. I think I'll preserve, people sometimes call it protecting your peace. I would say protecting your peace is both gendered and it's racialized because
Yeah.
all of our peace is not the same. Peace looks different in different bodies and peace looks different in different hands. And so when have you chosen comfort when really the situation called for you to be courageous? And what has the storytelling? What is the story that you tell yourself to justify the choice to stay comfortable when actually the situation calls for you to be courageous? And what would the story be if you had chosen courage and then followed that through? It comes all the way back to the same circle of influence. How do you choose to individually use your voice? To whom do you choose to practice your courage versus honor your silence? And what are the institutions where you've needed to be courageous, but have maybe chosen comfort because of what is at stake? Knowing that there is always another opportunity to make another choice, that there's no such thing as the end of the road when it comes to storytelling. You can choose another story. You can choose the currency of courage when previously you've chosen to center your comfort. That is always the option. And again, courage is the choice to connect to what you are scared of in order to move forward with the thriving that you say you believe in, um, And that requires your contribution, requires your courage, requires your voice to actually make real.
On that note, sadly for all of us, I have to end it there, people. Courage over comfort, right? We need this now more than ever with our storytelling. I want to thank you, Esther, for
Wait, we don't have any questions?
We're done.
Don't we have questions?
No, everybody was literally like listening to everything that you said. Go into the chat, you'll see they're like, she's amazing, the pearls, dropping knowledge. It's all in there. But Claire, over to you. Thank you so much, Esther. And I did my best to not be like, every time you said something. Just so you know.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. I was thought we were about to get into questions. I'm so sorry. I talked too long, I think.
No. I promise you, people just wanted to hear what you had to say. That's the reason why I didn't move to questions.
Yeah, please don't apologize for all of the wisdom and insights that you're sharing. I think a lot of people in the chat, I was getting DMs from folks being like, so much, I'm absorbing so much. So thank you so much for bringing time, energy, space, insights, all of it to this wonderful conversation. And I'm sorry we don't have longer to chat, but I just wanted to. I know. Maybe we'll do it again.
Do it again.
We will. And for folks who signed up through Eventbrite, please do not worry that you have to remember everything that was shared in this conversation. We'll be sending you a recording of the event. My wonderful colleague, Tony, who's on this call, has been capturing all of the links that have been shared, some of the nuggets and just like wisdom statements, if we want to call it, that we can maybe take away into our day-to-day lives. And a very, very grateful thank you, Christabel, for generating this space and for hosting this conversation. And we'll share how to stay in touch. And hopefully it's not the last time we will see Esther in our community and our conversation.
Because I can't help myself, I have to do this. Yeah, the book is really good. It's really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody.
So much.
Thank you to everybody. This is really